Hello and welcome. This is Matthias 76. Together, we are decoding the deception, and we are continuing our journey through the book of Acts. And with the book of Acts, when we use that expression, a journey through the book of Acts, it really is a journey because we're following the journeys of the apostles, primarily the apostle Paul. And the thought occurred to me as I was just looking at all the different screens I have available in my Bible software here, in Logos Bible software, and I looked at the map. The last trip the trip that Paul is about to take today, actually, he's going from down here in Jerusalem, and he's going to be sent up to Caesarea Philippi, as in Philip of Macedon. It was Caesarea Philippi. It had been named after Philip, the father of Alexander the Great, and then it was changed to Caesarea in honor of Caesar. Probably won't get to it today, but we will pull up some artist renderings of what Caesarea looked like, and it really was a spectacular city. But if we back out here and look at the Mediterranean and all the places that Paul had gone up through here on his first missionary journey, and then back up through there and over here into the second missionary journey, and then the third missionary journey, all this traveling that he had done in all these places. And for this section of the book, he's just saying right here, he's eventually going to be off to Rome, and that is a journey, an adventure for he and Luke and the others all its own, but just different. You know, Paul has been on the go. He has been on the move throughout all of the book, decades, literally, since chapter 13. And actually, even before that, he'd been down to Jerusalem and back up to Antioch and then off on his journeys. And now he's in this relatively small, confined area for some time. We dealt last time in the video with what went on there in Jerusalem with him being arrested, and he had got the ruler there had taken him before the Sanhedrin, and there was that, he talked about the resurrection. That's why he was there, and there was the chaos, and they pulled him out of there and brought him back to the safety of the Roman court there. And the last thing that happened is what we have here in verse 11. The following night, the Lord stood by him and said, "Take courage, for as you have testified to the facts about me in Jerusalem, so you must testify also in Rome." And this verse, this appearance of Jesus Christ in the flesh, standing there, it says the Lord stood beside him, and giving these words of taking courage, "As you have testified to the facts about me," so all Paul did was testify to the facts. God had come, we'll reference this at that time, but they intended to kill him. And let us not miss here the maniacal rage against Christ and his church, at this time directed against Paul, the arguably most successful of all the apostles as far as what he accomplished in spreading the gospel. The hatred, the venom, they couldn't stand it. They couldn't stand him. And it teaches us something. It reminds us that there is nothing rational about unbelief, and it's not just unbelief. It is hatred of the truth. They don't want to hear it. It upsets them. They can't stand it. They close their ears and grind their teeth and rush at you to kill you, as we have seen earlier in the book of Acts. There was true evil here in what was going on, this hatred against Paul and against the gospel. And these 40 guys swore they weren't going to eat anything until they had killed him, and they set their plot. They'll get the tribune to bring him back. Now, why would the tribune bring him back when he saw what happened the time before? And don't forget, with all of this, these guys who got sent to Palestine, to Judea here, to rule, to govern, to have these important positions, they knew full well that they had the toughest case in the Roman Empire as far as keeping people in line, keeping the peace. And the Jews had far more freedom in a lot of ways. We've talked about that in connection with other things than most of the other districts, governing regions of Rome allowed the citizens there to have. This thing, it was, I'm trying to think of an analogy to use, but it was like juggling cats, right? If you didn't do it just right, those claws were going to get you. And it was a make or break thing for you. If you did well here, you were rewarded. If you didn't, you weren't there for long, and your standing in the empire and your chances of advance would go away. So this was no easy assignment that they had in trying to keep the peace and govern here in Jerusalem, Judea. Now the son of Paul's sister heard of the ambush, so he went and entered the barracks and told Paul. Paul called one of the centurions and said, "Take this young man to the tribune, for he has something to tell him." So he took him and brought him to the tribune and said, "Paul the prisoner called me and asked me to bring this young man to you, as he has something to say to you." The tribune took him by the hand and going aside asked him privately, "What is it that you have to tell me?" And he said, "The Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul down to the council tomorrow, as though they were going to inquire somewhat more closely about him. But do not be persuaded by them, for more than 40 of their men are lying in ambush for him, and have bound themselves by an oath neither to eat nor drink till they have killed him. And now they are ready, waiting for your consent." So the tribune dismissed the young man, charging him, "Tell no one what you have informed me of these things, or that you have informed me of these things." Interesting thing here, and we can read over this and think it's interesting, but if we slow down and think about the setting, the situation, where Paul was, what was going on, who the tribune is, all those things, there are a number of interesting things that stand out here. Number one, Paul was allowed to have visitors. This little boy, this man, young man, whatever he is, was allowed to come in. Something else, just in general. Son of Paul's sister heard their ambush, so he went and entered the barracks. Paul had family. Radical concept. We hear nothing about it other than this. He's got a sister. He's got a nephew, at least two relatives Paul has here in Jerusalem. They were people of standing. This little boy had access to the power players. Number three, maybe it's number three. Yeah. Kids are invisible. Little kids are invisible. People will talk about stuff in front of kids because they think, what's it matter if they know? They don't even notice them. They're like, part of the furniture, whatever else. But this kid was Paul's nephew. He was sharp and he was paying attention. Maybe he went there intentionally to spy, to see what they were talking about. Maybe mom wanted to know, and she sent about what was going to happen to her brother, what the Jews were saying, and the little boy could go in there because they obviously were a family of power and prestige. He had access. He wasn't some little street kid coming in. He found this information out, and off to Paul he goes to tell Paul. He could get to Paul. Some people could come and see him. We're going to see that. Paul's not in a dungeon. They don't have him in chains somewhere. He's simply detained. Probably had a decent room, those kind of things in this setting. Why? Because he's a Roman citizen. If this were Peter, he would be in the clink. He'd be in some lockup situation somewhere, but this boy could come in and see Paul. He tells Paul what's going on. Paul calls a centurion and sends him off to see the tribune. Something else that we can deduce here. The tribune took him by the hand and going aside asked him privately. Number one, the tribune's smart. He's going to do this privately. He doesn't want a bunch of people hearing what's going on. What else would we deduce from this? He's pretty young. He's not going to take a 13-year-old by the hand and walk him off somewhere. I mean, we're somewhere in the range of 7, 8 years old that you would still take a child by the hand and walk him somewhere where no one could hear. There's stuff here to deduce and figure out, and he tells him the plot of what they intend to do. And again, the tribune's smart. He tells the little boy, don't tell anybody that you've told me. He doesn't want them to know because he has freedom of action, because the Jews don't know what he intends to do. With this, do you think this Roman tribune, who had centurions, which meant those guys who command at least 100 men, sometimes 200, 300, they just called them centurions. He had all these soldiers here with him. We're going to see that just with the detachment that he sends off. Do you think he was afraid of the Jews and their might and force? No, he's not. He's not. He is interested in avoiding open conflict and something that could turn into a big public scene, a riot, who knows what. And so he would rather preclude that. He would rather circumvent it and have it not come to be. And all of this, remember, this is right after Jesus came and appeared to Paul and said, don't worry, take courage. As you've testified to the facts about me here, so you must also testify about me in Rome. Still a long way from Rome. So Paul, in faith, is just saying, okay, whatever's going on here, the Lord is going to use this. And I know I'm going to be okay because I'm going to get to Rome. Then he, that is the tribune, called 2 of the centurions and said, get ready 200 soldiers with 70 horsemen and 200 spearmen. I'm not real good at math, but I'm counting 470 men that the tribune could spare to send on this mission to get Paul safely to Felix, the governor. So what does that tell us about how many troops were there in Jerusalem? To go as far as Caesarea at the 3rd hour of the night. Also provide mounts for Paul to ride and bring him safely to Felix, the governor. So we've got 470 men, 70 horsemen, 200 spearmen, 200 soldiers going with him, and a horse for Paul as well, so that he could keep up. And they're going at the 3rd hour of the night. What's the 3rd hour of the night? 3rd hour of the night's 9 o'clock. They're leaving it dark. They're in the dark. They're heading out in the dark so that no one knows. He would prefer to not have any kind of violent conflict with these 40 assassins who intend to get Paul. And you would think that if the 40 assassins did know, they're not going to try to get him with this force accompanying him. So here is his letter to Felix the governor. And pay attention to what he says and how he says it, and see if you notice anything here that might remind you of things you've experienced in the workplace or somewhere else. Claudius Lysias, to His Excellency Felix, the governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Jews and was about to be killed by them when I came upon them with the soldiers and rescued him, having learned that he was a Roman citizen. And desiring to know the charge for which they were accusing him, I brought him down to their council. I found that he was being accused about questions of their law, but charged with nothing deserving death or imprisonment. And when it was disclosed to me that there would be a plot against the man, I sent him to you at once, ordering his accusers also to state before you what they have against him. What do you think of that letter? What do you think of that letter? How many times have you seen somebody in the workplace or maybe in local government or whatever kind of organization it might be, when they're reporting to a higher up, they kind of shift the narrative a little bit to make themselves look better. Why did he go and rescue Paul? Oh, well, he had found out he was a Roman citizen. Well, when did he find out he was a Roman citizen? He found out he was a Roman citizen when Paul was stretched out to be what? To be flogged. And Paul told them he was a Roman citizen, and then the centurion came and told him he was a Roman citizen. We've got just a little bit of free license here to reconstruct the narrative in a way that makes Claudius Lysias, there's a good Bible trivia question, what was the name of the tribune? He was Claudius Lysias. Make himself look good. And then even the part about having been made aware, true honesty is, Paul made me aware that there was a plot to kill him. But he's not going to say that. let him think that it's his spy network that figured this out, and that makes me, Claudius Lysias, look better before Felix, the governor, and so be it. But what did they find? This is a common theme. Rome allowed Judea, the Jews, pretty much to govern themselves. That's why we had Herod the king. It's why we've got the high priests and the council having all kinds of sway as to how things were done there in Jerusalem. So he's being accused about questions of their law. They were allowed to enforce their law. They couldn't put anyone to death, although at times, Stephen, they did anyway, although that would technically have been referenced as a mob action and not a decree from the council. But there's also this thing we see again and again, that Rome really didn't get the Jews. They just didn't get them. They were different. They were weird. And now God always wanted the Jews, his people, Israel, to be different, to be set apart, to be weird compared to everyone else. Because when you're the only ones who are a certain way, everybody else thinks you odd, strange, weird. But the Romans never really do get the Jews and their religion. It makes no sense to them, but they could do what they wanted as long as they paid tribute and were faithful. Translate, didn't make any trouble for Rome. But he knew enough about it. And there was questions about their law, about whether, later it'll come up, whether this one guy was dead or alive. Paul says he's alive. The others say he's dead. They didn't even get the resurrection thing at all. It was completely outside of their scope, their frame of reference as far as anything religious-wise. But charged with nothing deserving death or imprisonment. He got that much. Whatever it is, this guy doesn't need to be locked up. He doesn't need to be imprisoned. So here's the question of the day. Why is he? Why is he still locked up? Why did Claudius Lysias still have him locked up? That's a good question. He says here, there's no offense other than some theological squabble he has with the Sanhedrin. So why is he still locked up? And he's a Roman citizen. He's a Roman citizen. Now it can be, we can go back and look at Pontius Pilate and Jesus. Pontius Pilate knew Jesus hadn't done anything, but he's going to execute him. He's going to crucify him. Why? Because he was afraid of the Jews and the trouble that could come. And there was a long history of it, and it would continue. And at this point in time, we're only 15, 20 years from when Jerusalem is going to be leveled because of a revolt. Okay. These guys knew they were sitting on a powder keg. If Paul had been anywhere else and this guy were ruling, if it were in Asia Minor, wherever it might be, he would have been set free. But they're bending to the Jews. So he writes this letter, making himself look good for sending him to Felix, who is going to continue this pattern of behavior, kowtowing to the Jewish authorities, putting up with them because they didn't want trouble. The quickest way to lose your position was to have chaos in your governing region. And this guy, Felix, the governor, Claudius Lysias to His Excellency, the governor, Felix, basically he's the same position as Pontius Pilate. He's at that rank, okay? They had different titles for things, but he's ruling this region just as Pontius Pilate had ruled this region, or Rome. He was the one in charge. So the soldiers, according to their instructions, took Paul and brought him by night to Antipatris. And on the next day, they returned to the barracks, letting the horsemen go on with him. So now we're down to just the 70 horsemen, the 200 soldiers, the 200 spearmen. They're going back. So they have, make this a little bigger here. They have come up here as far as Antipatris, and now they're going to head on up to Caesarea. And just again, how do they know that this is likely the route that they took? Because now, more than likely, there are highways here. They still use the same roadways. Roads get put where they are because it's easier to build roads there. But they went as far as Antipatris. 400 of them are heading back, and they're just going with the 70 horsemen on up to Caesarea. When they had come to Caesarea, they delivered the letter to the governor. They presented Paul also before him. On reading the letter, He asked what province he was from, and when he heard that he was from Cilicia, he said, I will give you a hearing when your accusers arrive. And he commanded him to be guarded in Herod's praetorium. So he gets there, the formalities, and Felix he asks what province he's from. Why does he ask what province he's from? Because he's a Roman citizen. He had to have been born somewhere. And if you remember, this is our thumbnail from last week's video when we talked about Paul playing the Roman card. And this is his Roman card. His name's Saul, city of birth, Tarsus. And I would have been more accurate if I'd put Tarsus of Cilicia. That is the Roman region, province, in which he was born. So where you were born, all of those things that mattered to the Romans. He was following protocol there, basically. So now we've got Paul before Felix at Caesarea. And after 5 days, the high priest Ananias came down with some elders and a spokesman, one Tertullus. They laid before the governor their case against Paul, and when he had been summoned, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying, don't you imagine Tertullus like wearing a turtleneck and looking like a turtle? I don't know, crossed my mind. But it's 5 days later, they come down, it's Ananias, and they came down. It's always down, right? By our reckoning, they came up because they were heading north. No, the world revolved in their minds around Jerusalem, and everything from Jerusalem was down. They came down. So here goes Tertullus, and he's going to sound just like a politician. Do we enjoy much peace? And since by your foresight, most excellent Felix, reforms are being made for this in every way and everywhere, we accept this. That is not a charge unless you have specific details for a specific instance, and then it might be inciting a riot or telling people not to pay their taxes. Remember, they tried to get Jesus with that one. There had to be a specific charge. What specific charge is here against Paul? Absolutely nothing. And when you don't know what to accuse him of other than that you don't like him, you make it sound very elegant or eloquent, not elegant, eloquent and flowery, right? That's what we have here. And it sounds, and don't you, when you read this stuff and really thinking about it, I always go the same place. There's nothing new under the sun. Our politicians and people today aren't any different in the way they operate. They use a bunch of flowery speech. The more flowery the speech, the more lacking in substance the content of their message. And we certainly have that here. They'd arrested this guy. Think of it. We talked today about what does that cost? You know, when you look at the people coming across the border in the United States and them being housed in all these places, one of the best arguments that's made, apart from the crime and all that, what does it cost? We're flying these people to different cities in jets. We're putting them up in hotels. All of this stuff. What's the cost? Look at the cost already for what's going on with Paul, who did absolutely nothing. It hadn't cost the Jews anything, but what does it cost Rome? They had to send 470 soldiers to Antipatris and then back, and then the rest of them coming all the way up to Caesarea. Do you think that Claudius Lysias, the tribune, and Felix had more important things to be doing on behalf of Rome? Yeah, probably. All this time, all this effort, all this money being spent, and this is all that they can come up with. And when the governor had nodded to him to speak, Paul replied, knowing that for many years you have been a judge over this nation, I cheerfully make my defense. You can verify that it is not more than 12 days since I went up to worship in Jerusalem, and they did not find me disputing with anyone or stirring up a crowd, either in the temple or in the synagogue or in the city. How long had this been going on already? Well, he just said 12 days. Actual details, actual data. Neither can they prove to you what they now bring up against me. But this, I confess to you, that according to the way, which they call a sect, I worship the God of our fathers, leaving everything laid down by the law and written in the prophets. having a hope in God, which these men themselves accept, that there will be a resurrection of both the just and the unjust. So I always take pains to have a clear conscience toward both God and man. Now, after several years, I came to bring alms to my nation and to present offerings. While I was doing this, they found me purified in the temple without any crowd or tumult. But some Jews from Asia, they ought to be here before you and to make an accusation, should they have anything against me. Or else let these men themselves say what wrongdoing they found when I stood before the council, other than this one thing, that I cried out while standing among them. It is with respect to the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial before you this day. You see what Paul did? I mean, we talk about a lot of what Paul did, but before we go back and work our way through that, I want to hit this. He's here before Felix. He's here standing before Rome's governor. And what does he do? Exactly what Jesus had talked about. He bore witness about the facts of what the faith was about. He's talking about the resurrection. They gave him the opportunity to do that. The Jews, who we see in the scriptures again and again, always think they're being so clever. They always get undone by their own scheming. They don't want this message preached anywhere. They want it rubbed out, stomped out, eliminated. And what did they do? They forced Paul to be here where Paul has the opportunity. And do you think it was just Felix? Or do you envision the governor's palace here, ornate, banners and seats, columns, and all these people coming to see what's going on? Because this wasn't the only thing this day that Felix was going to look into. And Paul gets to proclaim before them all the gospel here in this official setting. There is, you can look at it as being comical, ironic, or you still think of it those ways, but it's God's plan. This is what was going on, exactly what he told him in chapter 23, verse 11, to do. Witness, proclaim, and you're going to do it all the way to Rome, the capital of the known world at the time. Let's go back and look at the details. He talks about Felix being a ruler here for a while, and this is going to come into play later, that he's been here a while. These things, what was going on with the spread of the gospel, the growth of the church, it wasn't done in a corner. It's not like everyone didn't know about it. So Felix wasn't new. Festus is going to come and take over. He'll be new. But Felix wasn't new. He knew about the way, the sect, these Christians, the Nazarenes, whatever you want to call them, that, is said derisively. Why would they say the Nazarenes, sect of the Nazarenes? Why would they do that? Because Nazareth was a nowhere dump of a town in the backwaters of Galilee. It was nothing. It's an insult. That's why they called him the sect of the Nazarene. But Paul does something that they didn't do. He uses data. You can verify. You can go investigate, find these things out. I was there 12 days ago. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I'd been purified before I entered the temple, all these different things. And then what does he say? Neither can they prove what they're bringing up against me. Just a true defense. What does he say? I got to find it here. They found me purified in the temple without any crowd or tumult, but some Jews from Asia, they ought to be here before you to make an accusation. Same thing today. You have to have someone making the accusation. You have to have someone saying, this is what I saw. And while there are differences between our justice system, our injustice system, and Rome's injustice system, there are also similarities, okay? You had to have somebody making the accusation. They had to go on the record. They had to do it publicly. And those Jews aren't here. With that, case should have been thrown out. And there isn't anybody here who has standing to make an accusation. But it's not going to be. Why? Because Felix is afraid of them. Not afraid of them in the sense like they can come and attack them and undo them, but they can cause trouble. And he's got to get along with them. And how important is Paul? How important is this Jesus Christian thing in the big scheme of things. He's going to focus on, and very often, this is the way rulers operate. They focus on the expedient. They will do the expedient. The thing that is easier is the path that they will choose. And the expedient is almost always the enemy of justice and truth and fairness and all of those things. But what does Paul matter compared to having to get along with these people until I can get out of here, get back to Rome, get credit for having done a good job here in advance, and hopefully get to stay there for the rest of my career? That's the way he was thinking. But Felix, having a rather accurate knowledge of the way, he knew about it. Put them off, saying, "When Lysias the tribune comes down, I will decide your case." Then he gave orders to the centurion that he should be kept in custody, but have some liberty, and that none of his friends should be prevented from attending to his needs. So this is important. Felix has an understanding of the way. He's familiar with it, and he talks about Lysias the tribune coming down, and that then he'll decide his case. And then, we'll keep moving along in the video to come, in the lesson to come, and we'll be wondering, well, why didn't that happen? When was that? And we're not told. But what's he doing? What's he doing? What does a desire to achieve expediency? In order to do that, oftentimes they stall. And make no doubt about it, there is no doubt about it, Felix knew exactly the right thing to do right here, right now. He knew exactly what to do. If he weren't afraid of the Jews causing trouble and his desire to get along with them, because they might lose this battle, but they'll come back at him with other things and just make his life miserable. If it weren't for that, he would have dismissed this thing. There was no basis for a case, but that's not what happens. Instead, he stalls, but probably because A, Paul's a Roman citizen, and B, he knows the truth here. He basically says, "Hey, Paul, you got to stay here in the palace, but your friends can take care of your needs. They can bring you food, bring you money, whatever else, come and go, but you're still officially detained here in this opulent place." That's what was going on. So, we'll do this next verse and finish up the chapter, this section. After some days, Felix came down with his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish, and he sent for Paul and heard him speaking about faith in Christ Jesus. So Felix is married to a Jew, and as he reasoned about righteousness and self-control and the coming judgment, Felix was alarmed and said, "Go away for the present. When I get an opportunity, I will summon you." Luke doesn't give the content of this sermon and this conversation that he has with Felix. But when you read the brief summary here in this one verse, there are some things that we can deduce. And he reasoned about righteousness and self-control and coming judgment. He was framing things in a context that a Roman governor could understand. Remember, Paul was the master, following in the footsteps of his Savior, the one who sent him. Paul was a master at addressing a crowd, addressing a crowd of one or two or hundreds or thousands in the way that made sense to them. He talked to Gentiles in a certain way. Think of Mars Hill at the Areopagus. He spoke to Jews a certain way, citing things from the Old Testament. Here, he's talking to Felix, who's married to a Jew, who's all about the Roman justice system and their view of the world. And remember, just because these people lived at the same time did not mean at all that they shared the same view of the world and how it operated. They were vastly different. That's why the Jews and the Romans were often at loggerheads. But he reasoned. Paul's an intelligent guy. Felix, he's an intelligent guy. You didn't get to where Felix was without being an intelligent guy, so he reasoned. He's talking about at a high level. righteousness and self-control and the coming judgment. And what does it say? Felix was alarmed and said, "Go away for the present. When I get an opportunity, I will summon you." He scared Felix. The word was having effect. But Felix, in this moment, makes a choice. He makes a choice. And this is often what happens when people hear the gospel. In this instance, the Holy Spirit is working on Felix's heart. And Felix, as he contemplates all of this, and part of him is being drawn to this, he realizes something. If I buy into this, if I allow this Spirit to continue to advance and take over my heart, I'm going to lose everything that I am and everything that I have, and I have to rethink the whole world. And that's what scared him. He didn't want to do that. He didn't want to relinquish his heart. He didn't want to relinquish his power. He didn't want to relinquish his place. Because trust me, he converts to Christianity. He's done with Rome. They'll throw him out like yesterday's lunch. He'll be gone. Okay. There are these things that, and sometimes it can happen even to us as believers. If I continue to grow, if I truly, fully give myself to the gospel, to my Lord, what does that mean? I'm pushing out the other side. I'm letting Jesus in farther. What does that mean is going to go? But I like these things. I like this aspect of my life, whatever it might be, and we stop. And we stop. And that is a spiritual danger to us. It puts us in spiritual peril. And we think of the Apostle John saying, "Do not love the world or the things in the world." And that's not just items. It's the world and all that it represents. And that is exactly the conflict that Felix had. And Felix decided it quickly. Nope, I'm stopping here. He was alarmed and said, "Go away for the present. When I get an opportunity, I will summon you." And then the true nature of Felix's heart comes out. At the same time, he hoped that money would be given him by Paul. So he sent for him often and conversed with him. He wanted a bribe. It's the way the world works. And, I used to be naive. I was a missionary in Peru, and there were certain things that if you wanted to get them done, it took a little bit of extra money. That's the way the world there worked. And I thought it was so corrupt and so crooked and so third world, whatever. And now as my understanding of how things work in this world is no different. It's no different. It's just done more discreetly. Money buys justice. Money buys access. Money buys power. It's just the way it is. And so Felix kept Paul locked up, waiting for Paul to bribe him. And Paul wasn't going to bribe him because Paul knew he was supposed to go to Rome, and he wouldn't have bribed him anyway. But Paul knew he was supposed to go to Rome, but Felix would call him and converse with him every now and then, probably so that on the paperwork he could say he was working on this situation. When 2 years had elapsed, underline that, at least in your mind. 2 years. He was here, locked up unjustly, locked up. Yeah, okay, he's in a really nice place, but still he was detained. Don't you think at Paul's core he was thinking, all the places I could have been, I would have been to Spain by now, twice, but I'm stuck here. But he was patient and faithful because Jesus told him, this is what I want you to do. And if Jesus wanted him out, he would have gotten him out, but he didn't. But it's 2 years that elapse while Felix is here. And in the next chapter, we're going to transition to Festus. I'm going to go from Felix to Festus. Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus. And desiring what? To do the Jews a favor. Felix left Paul in prison. Same thing. We see that underlying current of how things worked playing out here again. Didn't matter about justice. Didn't matter about what was right. He was going to keep him locked up. All right, we're going to stop there. We'll pick up next time with chapter 25. I want to remind you about our website, decodingthedeception.com. Got all kinds of resources out here, starting to add back some of the resources we had here before out here in our research and resources here with Video Knowledge Base. We're starting to add things back to that and rebuild it. It had gone away for a while. We've got all our Bible videos here, and it is decodingthedeception.com. But all you have to do is come here. You can click on Revelation Revisited. That's the series that we just started. And then we got the place, you just click and it takes you right to the playlist. It is the easiest way to find our videos, and I know a lot of you are making use of that. In the same way, here with the Book of Acts, you just click and it takes you here to our playlist with all the videos for the Book of Acts. They're in order, and you can follow them through. You can see we've done a lot of videos on the Book of Acts. There's the last one. Paul plays the Roman card. This one will be added there by the time you see this video. But do make use of this. It's a great resource for you to be able to find all of our videos and all the things that we have to offer for you here at Decoding the Deception. Do encourage you, give this video a thumbs up, share it with others, subscribe to the channel here on whatever platform you are watching this video on. This is Matthias 76. Together, we are decoding the deception. God bless and have a great day.